thank you to Boxu for sponsoring today's video. More on them later. So I got questions for you, Boruto, and unfortunately, those questions don't appear to have many answers in sight. Chapter 16 of Boruto's Two Blue Vortex revealed that for some reason, Jiraiya doesn't want to destroy Konoha. But if Jiraiya doesn't want to destroy Konoha, and therefore isn't going to be the person to destroy Konoha, why does Konoha get destroyed an episode in Chapter 1 of Boruto? If the strongest person on Earth, who's currently an antagonist, opposed to Konoha as an idea, isn't going to be the person to destroy Konoha, then how is Konoha gonna come to rue it? And unfortunately, when it boils down to it, if the bad guys aren't gonna destroy the village, we gotta start looking at the good guys. See, because really when it boils down to it, if Jiraiya's not gonna be the person to destroy Konoha because he believes it holds archaeological or scientific relevance to the future of humanity, then the only people left strong enough to destroy Konoha are unfortunately the people who are actively trying to defend Konoha. Because as it currently stands, there are only 3 things with heartbeats in the Boruto world that could stand a chance against destroying Konoha, and 2 of those things with heartbeats are from Konoha. So trying to figure out the weave of the tapestry that brings us to the Boruto and Kawaki fight in chapter and episode 1 of Boruto has only gotten infinitely more difficult after the events of chapter 16. However, unweaving that tapestry is my job. And thus today, that is exactly what I'm gonna try to do. Because today I'm trying to answer one of the most important questions in the multitude of questions revolving around the general question of how do Boruto and Kawaki get to the positions that we see them in chapter and episode 1 of Boruto. Because today we're talking Boruto destroys Konoha. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Hold up. Are you really about to watch an NC Hammer 23 video without a snack? These are like 25-minute videos. What if you get hungry? Listen, I'll forgive you this time, but not next time. Which is why I'm gonna talk to you about today's sponsor, Boxu. See, Boxu is a premium Japanese snack box that work with family businesses all across Japan and deliver a new themed snack box every single month directly to your door. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I got a weeb in my life that would absolutely adore this, well, great idea. It's a fantastic gift. And if you do decide to gift Boxu this holiday season, this is the box that your loved one will be getting. And this month's theme is the seasons of Japan. See, inside of this box is essentially a collection of some of the greatest hits of Boxu's snacking career. The most popular snacks and flavors from each season. And I'll tell you right now, some of my favorites are in here. Like this chocolate Tsukisamo Anpan. I mean, this thing? Do you know how hard it would be for me to find this in America? I mean, this is doughy. It's not too bready. The chocolate flavor is subtle, but still deliciously sweet. It's perfect. But maybe you're more into chips as a snack. Well, whatever your interest, the variety of a Boxu box has got you covered. And as somebody who just likes snacking, that's right up my alley. Oh my God, it's delicious. It's citrusy with a light flavor of seaweed. It's crispy. Oh, that's a new favorite. And maybe you're like me and you don't know every single snack in this box. Well, that's what this culture guide right here is for. It tells you all about the history, creation, allergens, and flavors of every snack in this box. So listen, if you're the kind of person who likes to put their Christmas shopping on autopilot, Boxu's got your back. To get a bounty of diverse snacks like this, you would have to wander the streets of Japan for weeks. But Boxu does all the hard lifting for you. So what are you waiting for? If you want to give the gift of authentic Japanese snacks this holiday season, click the link in my description or use code NCHammer23 at checkout to get $15 off your first order of Boxu today. There's never been a better time to give yourself a little treat up. Now, calling this video Boruto will destroy Konoha is slightly misleading, though it is the best title. See, because today I don't just want to talk about the possibility that Boruto is the person who will destroy Konoha. See, because in actuality, now that it's been established that Jiraiya will not be the person to destroy Konoha, I believe the fault of Konoha's destruction can really only fall on 3 pairs of shoulders. And those 3 people are Boruto, Kawaki, in Shibai. And honestly, I believe the likelihood of either of these 3 people being the person to destroy Konoha increases as we head down that line. Though there is absolutely a solid case for either Boruto, Kawaki, or Shibai being the people who end up destroying Konoha. But before we get to diving into any of these possibilities, let's give a little bit of context, possibly for those of you who haven't read chapter 16 of Two Blue Vortex yet. See, because it was established in chapter 16 that Himawari is currently safe within the confines of Konoha from Jiraiya. See, for those those of you who don't remember, the person that Jura as a Shinju wanted to consume originally was Naruto. However, unfortunately, getting to Naruto nowadays is kind of tricky. As to why Jura wanted to consume Naruto, we're not entirely sure. I believe it has something to do with Jigen or Ishiki, because most likely Jura gets his ego from one of those two. But when we go through with the line of thinking that the Shinju wants to consume the person who was most important to the person their claw grime bit to make them in the first place, to me it would make more sense if Jura wanted to consume Kawaki. And yet, Jura wants to consume Naruto. Now, it could be because it's been confirmed that Jura is the humanoid version of the emaciated Ten-Tails who created all the claw grimes in the first place, but in the grand scope of this video, none of that really matters. All that really matters is that Jura can't get his meaty clackers on Naruto because Naruto's sealed in the Daikokuten and Jura has no way of getting there. And thus Jura, after meeting Himawari, who seems to have the closest chakra signature to Naruto on Earth, looked at her and decided, good enough, I'll eat the child. Now, because Himawari is a main character, and also because watching a child be eaten is a little out of the scope of the Naruto universe, Himawari got away and is currently being protected by Konoha. Now, the reason I say protected by Konoha is because it's established in chapter 16 that there's nobody on Earth who could really stop Jura from doing anything he wanted to do if Jura was actually committed to doing it. In fact, the exact wording is, if Jura got serious, the good guys would have a 1 in a million shot at victory. But for the time being, so long as Himawari stays in Konoha, Jura's not going to come after her. And this is because Jura believes that Konoha is a culturally important place. And therefore, by flying into Konoha and trying to abduct Himawari, who's powerful enough to fight back at least a little bit, would destroy large swaths of Konoha, and therefore Jura wouldn't be able to appreciate its beauty and understand its history. Kind of like how we as modern humans are pissed about the fact that ancient Rome and ancient Greece got sacked. We would like to be able to visit ancient Rome or ancient Greece or Sumeria, these cradles of civilization that were massively important to humanity's development. And Jura apparently looks at Konoha with the same level of fascination as we look back at previous civilizations. And thus, so long as Himawari is in Konoha, she's safe. But if Jura doesn't want to destroy Konoha, it leaves us with the incredibly pressing question of who's gonna destroy Konoha. And while some people out there are going, oh, I think it's gonna be Code, it's not gonna be Code. Yes, Code is incredibly powerful, but he's also currently a left arm beater who got one shot by Boruto. And if Kawaki's able to get his limiters off, like Boruto told him he should in chapter 15, then there's also really no reason to believe that Kawaki won't end up being massively stronger than Code as well. Code's actually one of the most interesting characters in Boruto right now, to me at least, because I, for the life of me, cannot figure out his usefulness in this story. He created the Shinju don't want him, they're way too powerful for him. He wants for Boruto or Kawaki to be consumed by a Shinju and turn into a divine tree so he can eat a chakra fruit, but that's not gonna happen. And he, as an individual, does not pose a level of strength that is a threat to any major players in this story. In fact, as it looks now, I would honestly put Code closer to the likes of Sarada and Mitsuki than Boruto and Kawaki. But if Code's a Sarada Mitsuki level threat, then how would he end up destroying Konoha? The simple answer is he wouldn't. Even if he were to pull up with an army of claw grimes like he did in chapter 1, high-level Chunin and Jonin can take out claw grimes. And the source of his claw grimes, the emaciated Ten-Tails, is now Jura, so no more claw grimes are getting made. And thus, if Jura and Code aren't going to destroy Konoha, it really only boils down to 3 people. And in terms of legitimacy, I believe those 3 people are Boruto, Kawaki, and Shibai. And honestly, Kawaki and Shibai is kind of a neck-and-neck race. But before we get to Kawaki and Shibai, let's talk about the possibility that Boruto is the one to destroy Konoha. Now, I believe this to be the least likely possibility. And not just because Boruto is Team Konoha and wouldn't want to destroy his home village. No, it's more nuanced than that. See, really the only scenario in which Boruto would be the one to destroy Konoha is if Momoshiki were to take over his body. That is to say that Boruto wouldn't really be the person destroying Konoha, and rather it would be Boroshiki. Now, this idea isn't crazy. It's already been established in 2 Blue Vortex that Boruto is terrified of his karma marking fully manifesting, because he stated 2 years ago when he tried to activate his karma marking when Sasuke was battling against Code, that when he activated his karma marking, he felt as though he was dying while still being alive, like Momoshiki was taking over his body. And thus for the last 2 years, Boruto has very intentionally not used his karma marking. So how and why would Boruto end up using his karma marking? Well, the only scenario in which I see it legitimately happening could be if Boruto is pushed to the absolute edge of his limits. And the only real possibility we have in sight as it stands right now for Boruto to be pushed to the absolute limit of what he can do is an upcoming battle against Jura. See, Jura, who's now actively working with Code and has promised Code the chakra fruit that will come from a divine tree being grown on Earth, is technically moving against the wants of Momoshiki. See, really when it boils down to it, if Jura ends up beating the combined forces of Boruto and Kawaki, then Jura would be able to feed either Boruto or Kawaki to either a claw grime or another Shinju, which then in turn would create a divine tree that would soak up all of the chakra of the world, and Code would eat the chakra fruit of it, kind of giving rebirth to Ishiki. Now, Momoshiki doesn't necessarily have have beef with Ishiki. However, Momoshiki is a highly selfish being, and therefore Momoshiki has a vested interest in Code not being the person eating the chakra fruit created from Earth because he wants the chakra fruit created from Earth. And thus there is absolutely motivation on Momoshiki's side to make sure Boruto and Kawaki defeat Jura, and therefore by extension, Code. And thus, in a moment where it appears as though Boruto and Kawaki are going to lose in their battle against Kawaki, there's a possibility that Momoshiki taps Boruto on the shoulder for the first time in years and says, hey, use my power. We're gonna need it to beat Jura. Not only would this be a cool way to reintroduce the karma marking into Boruto's life, but it also follows anime and manga logic pretty much to a T. However, Momoshiki being Momoshiki, who wants Boruto to be cast into despair so he gives up the internal battle against Momoshiki for the control of Boruto's body, could possibly, after using the power of Borushiki to defeat Jura, go to Konoha with all the power of Borushiki and level it. And this would be a pretty good idea for Momoshiki. I mean, if you want to cast Boruto into despair, destroy his home. Make him, rather ironically, the villain that everybody already believes that he is. Confirm everyone's suspicions, solidify in Kawaki's head that Boruto needs to be destroyed. Because if Boruto and Kawaki become friends, possibly after the Jura battle, then one, that's another thing solidifying Boruto's mental state, and two, it lowers the chances that Boruto will ever end up killing Kawaki, and therefore leaving a corpse for Momoshiki to feed to a Clawgrime or a Shinju or a Ten Tails. And honestly, even though I'm sitting here and saying this is the least likely possibility, this theory does have some legs. See, because at the beginning of the Boruto and Kawaki fight, both Boruto and Kawaki appear to be very bruised and battered, which makes it seem as though they've been in a fight previous to the fight that they're about to have. Now, the reason that I don't think that Kawaki and Boruto are responsible for each other's bruised and battered states is one, because in the beginning of the fight, Boruto says, I guess this is how it was always going to end up, and two, because if Boruto has control over his karma marking and knows he's about to fight against Kawaki, it would make sense that Kawaki, while activating his karma marking, would resonate with Boruto, and that both of their karma markings would have already been activated. So the fact that Boruto activates his karma marking in chapter and episode 1 makes me believe that Boruto and Kawaki weren't fighting prior to that moment. Well, at least against each other. They were most likely fighting against something or somebody else. But Nick, if this theory makes so much sense, then why is it the least likely possibility? Well, ironically, because of what we literally just talked about. Boruto using his karma marking. Like we've already established, Boruto is actively avoiding the usage of his karma marking right now in 2 Blue Vortex, because he's afraid of a scenario like we literally just described, Momoshiki taking over his body and destroying Konoha and everything Boruto loves. So one of the biggest lingering questions we've had for a while now is, why does Boruto use his karma marking in the battle against Kawaki if he's actively trying to avoid the usage of it right now? And while I don't have an answer for that right now, I'll tell you right now, if Momoshiki was the reason that Konoha has been raised, then why on God's green earth would Boruto use his karma marking immediately after that, right? Think about it. If Borushiki is responsible for the destruction of Konoha, it would make no sense for Boruto, after destroying Konoha, the one thing he didn't want to do, go, well, you know, we can gamble it again. Why not? I mean, maybe you could make the argument that Boruto identifies that Konoha's gone, and therefore, even if Momoshiki takes over, there's nothing that I could destroy that I love anymore. But that's not the kind of thing that Boruto would do. Another argument to be made here, though, if you want to assume that Borushiki is the person who destroys Konoha, is maybe after Borushiki is done destroying Konoha, Boruto still claws back out and reseeds control of his body. And Boruto and Momoshiki have a similar conversation to the conversation they have in chapter 80 of part 1, where Momoshiki pales at the fact that Boruto still hasn't given in to his despair and talks about how this isn't the future that he saw. And in this moment specifically, Boruto once and for all prevails over the power of Momoshiki, and in a sense is able to, kind of like Kawaki, vacate the personality from his karma marking. And thus, like Kawaki, after Konoha is destroyed, Boruto is able to use his karma marking without fear of Momoshiki taking over his body, because Momoshiki has given in to his own despair. That is a possibility. However, if that happens, from a moral standpoint, it substantially weakens Boruto as a character. See, Boruto's entire argument to Kawaki is, I got my life under control. You don't need to worry about me. Go out and destroy all the Otsutskis. Get them, round them up, kill them. But me, I'm good. I got Momoshiki on a short leash. However, Kawaki came to the realization that he had to be the one to kill Boruto after Boruto stabbed out Sasuke's eye. And this is still something that Boruto feels terrible about. He weakened his master, which put his master in the situation of being bitten by a Clawgrime when battling against Code a year or so later. And therefore, therefore, Boruto is not only responsible for the stabbing out of Sasuke's eye, but also the destroying of Konoha as a whole, Boruto's argument for not being killed by Kawaki is substantially weaker. Yeah, maybe after Momoshiki's done destroying all of Konoha, Boruto's able to wrestle him back and put him in a dark locked box for the rest of his life. But after you've weakened one of the strongest people in the universe and destroyed a village where hundreds of thousands of people live, at a certain point, you gotta pay up. And this would make Kawaki the more justified opinion in Boruto by the time of their fight. And while I think that would lead to some complex and interesting talking points, unfortunately, when it boils down to it, I don't think Boruto's writing is that complex. Both Boruto and Kawaki being right, unfortunately, isn't necessarily within the scope of either Kishimoto or Ikimoto. There's gotta be a good guy, and it's gotta be obvious. That's why Naruto is basically Jesus. And thus, I don't find the possibility that Boruto is the person responsible for the destruction of Konoha all that likely. But since we're talking about the simple tonality of Boruto as an IP, I think a substantially more likely person responsible for the destruction of Konoha is Kawaki. Like we've already established, the good guys gotta be obvious, the bad guys gotta be even more obvious. And I'm not necessarily saying that Kawaki's gonna destroy Konoha intentionally. We briefly talked about this idea in my previous video, and it was that idea that spurred this video, but I'll briefly go over it again. See, Kawaki being the person responsible for the destruction of Konoha is kind of loose terming. More or less what we're talking about here is Kawaki is responsible for kicking off the fight that ends up destroying Konoha. See, like we've already talked about in this video, it's been established by Koji to Shikamaru that all of the combined forces of good stand no chance in a battle against a fully serious Jura, and therefore this is why Boruto ended up going to Kawaki in chapter 15 and asking for a team up. However, what's also asked of Kashin Koji to Shikamaru in chapter 16 is that Shikamaru go around to all the bookstores in Konoha and ask the owner specifically if Jura ever walks in looking for books to treat Jura like their #1 customer. And therefore, in a sense, at least temporarily, Konoha is laying down on their back and showing Jura their belly. Kind of like how they did with Amino, Daemon, and Ada. They're allowing for Jura to come into the village, spend some time there, and so long as he doesn't destroy anything, stick around for a while. However, this does mean that Jura is gonna be in Konoha. And while Shikamaru's gonna go around the entire village and tell everybody to not attack Jura because attacking him at worst means death and at best means away games for the rest of your life, if you know what I mean. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is gonna pay attention to that advisory. And by not everybody is gonna pay attention to that advisory, I mean specifically Kawaki is not gonna pay attention. See, Kawaki is already well known for having an incredibly short temper, and unfortunately that temper only gets shorter with people that have put Kawaki in his place. People like Code, Boruto, Mitsuki, basically anybody who fought him in Two Blue Vortex. And unfortunately, that list includes Jura, who embarrassed Kawaki so bad that even Delta, the girl who thought she could battle against Naruto one-on-one, popped over to Kawaki and said, maybe we think of a plan before we go to try and fight them again. And if Kawaki getting his teeth kicked down his throat by Jura once wasn't enough reason for him to immediately jump Jura upon seeing him a second time, there's also the possibility in the next couple of chapters it's going to be revealed that Jura has some kind of connection to either Jigen or Ishiki. Because yes, it's been established that Jura is the Ten Tails, but Jura had to get his ego from somewhere. And as it currently stands, the young, emaciated Ten Tails that was at the Kara hideout has no reason to want to consume Naruto, outside of the fact that he was briefly a Ten Tails Shinchuriki, but not a Ten Tails Shinchuriki of that Ten Tails. And if Jura does have some kind of connection to either Jigen or Ishiki, well, then Kawaki's gonna have a couple more reasons to try and jump him. As Kawaki would be particularly keen, as they say in Australia, I've been watching Australian Love Island, to eradicate any vestiges of either Jigen or Ishiki that still exist on this planet. And when you tie all of that into the fact that Kawaki's going to be getting an upgrade here soon when he finally gets his mitts on Amino and makes him release the limiters that are on Kawaki's body right now, Kawaki, kind of like Majin Vegeta, is going to get a boost in strength that makes him more confident that he should be. And thus Kawaki's going to press his luck and ignore the advisory of Shikamaru and attack Juro whenever he sees him in Konoha. And the combined forces of those two and Boruto going at it with Konoha as a battlefield will inevitably eventually lead to the destruction of Konoha. This way, even if Kawaki's boost in strength does allow for them to persevere over Jura, Kawaki's still the bad guy in the equation because Konoha is destroyed because of his decisions. And to me, that's one of the most likely scenarios as to how Konoha ends up destroyed, especially when you tie it back to one of Kawaki's most important central character development points, which was when he accidentally destroyed Himawari's vase. A vase that he had to learn couldn't be replaced, but could be fixed. A lesson in the core tenets of Naruto that hard work will always persevere over talent, money, or anything else. And thus if Kawaki was responsible for the destruction of Konoha, him having to rebuild Konoha alongside all of the villagers that he put out would be a direct tie back to him looking for all the pieces of Himawari's vase and slowly but surely putting it back together. But what if it's not gonna be Boruto or Kawaki? In actuality, It's gonna be Shibai. But how? How would it be Shibai? And more importantly, maybe why would it be Shibai? Well, listen, Boruto and Kawaki's battle could be the last thing that happens in this manga, and it's unfortunately somewhat likely that it will be. Now, this would obviously draw very straight lines to Naruto versus Sasuke, and how that battle closed out Naruto as a manga. And considering the fact that we've been hyping up this big final boss alien that is Shibai, there is a definitive non-zero chance that there is a big final battle against the big final boss alien, and then Kawaki and Boruto square up after defeating that alien. This would explain why Boruto and Kawaki seem banged up before starting their fight. In a battle against Shibai, the literal god of the Otsutsuki, would probably be a battle so pressing and difficult that Boruto and Kawaki couldn't stop Konoha from being destroyed in the first place. However, unfortunately, this still doesn't necessarily answer why Boruto is using his karma marking in the battle against Kawaki, unless of course Shibai is connected to Boruto like we've been theorizing about for so long. See, because if Shibai is connected to Boruto, presumably through his karma marking, or maybe the Jogan, not only is Kawaki a bit more justified in his argument that Boruto needs to be eradicated, because if Boruto is a standing connection to one of the strongest Otsutsuki of all time, he is kind of inherently a threat. But also this explanation has the added benefit of the idea that Boruto 2 years ago felt as though he was being taken over by his karma marking, when this isn't necessarily something that he's felt simply by activating his karma marking while dealing with Momoshiki. Ties into the fact that Boruto hasn't heard from Momoshiki in 3 years, even though in the later parts of part 1 of Boruto's manga, Momoshiki established that because Boruto and Momoshiki now share a 100% Otsutsuki body, Momoshiki and Boruto can communicate literally whenever. Then maybe the reason that Momoshiki hasn't been heard from inside of Boruto is because Momoshiki is losing the internal battle against Shibai. And therefore the reason Boruto felt as though the power of the karma marking was taking him over was because Boruto wasn't manifesting Momoshiki's power, but rather Shibai's, a power too grand for Boruto to fight back against. And therefore the possibility that either Shibai is able to crawl out of Boruto or maybe control his body akin to a Boroshiki type experience, and Shibai, in whatever form that he inhabits, is eventually defeated by either Kawaki or the combined forces of good. That would mean now that Shibai is no longer attached to Boruto's body, Boruto would be able to use his karma marking like he did in part 1 because he's able to control Momoshiki's powers. And thus this would explain, even if Boruto was responsible in a way for the destruction of Konoha, why Boruto would go on to use the karma powers after being responsible for the destruction of Konoha. Because now Boruto's karma marking would kind of be like Kawaki's, free of the massive and all-controlling power of Shibai, and with Boruto's mental resilience and ability to keep Momoshiki in check, Boruto would be able to use the power of the karma marking without fear of Momoshiki taking over his body, and therefore he would use that power to get a 1-up on Kawaki's new limitless strength after Amado takes the limiters off. And thus Boruto would somewhat unfortunately, even though the story structure would work quite well, get an ending very similar to that of Naruto. And while I find the idea of this slightly discouraging because Ikemoto has several times established the fact that he's trying to separate Boruto as an IP from Naruto, I don't know, I guess do what you're good at. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Out of these 3 theories, which do you believe is the most likely? Or if you don't believe any of them, who do you believe is going to be responsible for the destruction of Konoha? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go play Pokemon TCGP for the next 6 hours.